And good evening, everyone. Welcome back to Two Guys in the Bible here on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. My name is Don K. Preston. I'm the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. And there's Daniel Rogers on the big screen tonight,
Hello.
feeling much better.
Yeah, I'm feeling better than I was last week. I had a
Yeah.
persistent headache. I took Tylenol. Well, actually, I took ibuprofen earlier in the day. I tried taking a hot bath, drinking lots of water, and just couldn't shake it by that
Hmm.
night. So I don't know. But I'm doing fine today. But get this. Last Tuesday, I had a sick baby. This Tuesday, I have another sick baby. So I took the one to the doctor last week to get her regular wellness checkup, for 4 months. And they said we can't do anything with her because she has a fever, so you got to take her back home. Which we knew she had a fever. We just took her there anyways. And so today I took her back to the wellness checkup to have her looked at again without a fever this time. And they said she looks good. And as I dropped her off at daycare, I get a message from Caden's teacher down the hallway. Hey, he's in here laying down, got a fever. It's over 100. You got to come get him. So just Tuesdays have just not been good for me the past couple
No.
of weeks. uh,
Well, that's the way it goes when you got kiddos. That's just
that's
all in
right.
the world there is to it.
And now that we've added one more to the mix, that's another person for all the viruses and colds to go through. So, there we go.
Yeah, that's just kind of the way it is. I mean, right here in Ardmore, and I'm sure that's the way it is almost everywhere. Uh, we have the flu and then some other little virus of some sort
Yeah,
that is just absolutely raging through the community.
right.
Uh, I've been trying not to get out too much, and especially right now, it's snowing right here
Oh,
where I am.
oh,
It's been doing that on and off all day long. They they initially said that we might get up to 8 inches of snow. Well, for Ardmore, that would be like, I mean, that would just like a
yeah.
blizzard. Uh,
Snowmageddon. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. We just don't get that kind of snow. In all the years that I've lived here, I think we've had maybe two examples in which we had like 14 inches of snow. And that was just like, wow,
Yeah,
holy
yeah.
cow. It shut the whole community down.
We get enough to make a snowball, maybe, and that shuts everything down. And
Yeah,
that's once a year, in North Alabama, maybe twice a year. It depends on, sometimes
yeah.
we get one in like late March or something, just a random snow, and that's all we get.
Yeah, that's
If
about the way it is here in Ardmore. It's just, thankfully, it's not something that we have to deal with. And
Yeah,
Alan Morton, of course, you know him.
yeah.
Alan texted me the other day and he says, well, we have 25 inches of brand new snow on the ground today.
And those kids, they still expect it at school and everything.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
our,
miss
our
school for snow?
Yeah,
Why?
yeah. Ours is if you look on your little, you go on your phone, then it has percent chance 30%, snow for like 7 in the evening. Oh, school's canceled for 3 weeks. You just play it safe. Church canceled, school canceled, everything. Doctor's appointments, banks closed down. It's just mass hysteria.
Yeah, that's about the way it is here. Some years ago, uh, we had the threat, and it actually came true, of a really severe ice storm. Wasn't snow. In fact, we got extremely little snow,
Yeah.
but it was just black ice everywhere.
Oh man.
And of course, that's the most treacherous kind of driving that there is. But I mean, that shut down southern Oklahoma like you would not believe.
Yeah.
Our little town here was just like, okay, not going, not opening, not going there, no school, no church, no nothing.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
just like you were saying.
We
So
well, in the South, we don't have any money at all invested into snow plows or
yeah,
trucks to go out and put salt on the bridges or whatever. You get a little bit of that sometimes, but we just don't have the infrastructure for that. Nobody puts chains on their tires or even knows how to deal with black ice. So
yeah,
it's somewhat reasonable, the reaction that we have, especially living in a mountainous part of Alabama like I do. But it's still, people up north make fun of us all the time. So what are you gonna
yeah.
do?
We normally have a split screen. What happened to that?
I have no idea. Everything looks fine on my end. That's
Well,
on you.
I have you full screen and me and a little bitty small box up at the top.
If you hover over it with your mouse and you go to the top right, there's a little doohickey that says View, and
Oh,
you can change that to Gallery if you want. I keep
there
yours
we
on
are.
I keep yours on full screen because that's how I capture your video for you know the
Oh,
people out there. So
yeah. Okay, that's fine. Oh,
yeah,
it looks like I should have turned my light on in my little kitchen area to give a little bit of backlight here. But anyway, it is what it is. All right. Well, last week you were not able to be with us, but I continued our discussion of Isaiah chapter 65 under the umbrella theme of the Messianic temple. And as we pointed out before, we understand that the word temple is not found in Isaiah 65. That's not the point.
yeah,
The point is that so many of the themes that are found and that are discussed in Isaiah 65 are temple themes. You know, when the Lord said, Isaiah 65:25, they shall not hurt nor destroy in all of my holy mountain. Well, the holy mountain was Zion. It's the Temple Mount. And
yeah.
so,
Literally, the songs of ascension. You know.
oh, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So we have to think in the way, we have to think Hebraically. And what's so funny about the reason I laughed there is because on YouTube I've been going back and forth with a fella um, that has demonstrated an utter lack almost. Now, nice guy, okay. He's pressed his points, which are just fine. He hasn't been ugly, hasn't been acerbic at all. But he made some comments the other day as we were discussing Matthew 5:17 and 18. And he said, we have to think Hebraically. And I'm thinking to myself as I read that, yeah, you really need to take that to heart because you're not thinking Hebraically in your arguments.
Yeah.
Uh, and I don't know, that might have been a little bit of a jab at me because I'm all time saying we have to think Hebraically. I don't
Oh
know,
yeah, yeah.
but
Well,
it may have been a jab. I don't know.
sometimes some people throw out those words like that, Hebraically, or or maybe even the word orthodox or traditional, as kind of like supporting what they're saying without any evidence, kind of thing. And so
Exactly.
you got to watch it when people use those terms because a lot of times, even using labels like hyper preterist or hyper dispensationalist or something, you just throw those out there, and that's like, okay, I attached the right label to you. Now I don't have to deal with your argument because
Yeah, it's
So,
called pigeonholing, and that's
oh yeah,
exactly
yeah,
what it is. You know,
yeah.
if I could put you, Daniel Rogers, in a little box over here with a title on it that is a bugaboo, so to speak, then it's like you say, I don't have to deal with you because after all, you're like a JW, you're like a Mormon, you're like a
Sure.
you're like a Church of Christ, or you're like a Reform guy, or you're whatever.
And we
And so
all know that they've already been soundly refuted. So no
absolutely,
need to pay
absolutely.
attention to them. Yeah, but people can do that in the opposite way too. How many times do you hear a preacher get up, and I've done it, you've done it, we've all done it, but there's a difference, depending on the situation. Well, well, the Greek says,
Oh yeah.
well, and they don't know, they don't know Aleph from Alpha or whatever. And so it's
Yeah.
people sometimes just throw that out there to kind of give themselves some kind of credential that they don't actually have, to support what they're
Yeah.
saying. So
Well, it's exactly right. So anyway, even though as we just said, we understand that the word temple is not found in Isaiah 65. The motifs, the themes, the concepts and ideas associated with the temple most assuredly are there. So again, last week I discussed one of the really, really important themes that is linked with the entire subject, and that's the salvation of the remnant. Throughout Jeremiah, throughout Isaiah, throughout Hosea, we find the concept that in the last days the remnant would be brought back to Yahweh. Um, and I've been dealing with some people, not extensively at all, but I've been dealing with some people that they label themselves as universalists. And one of the things that strikes me as completely untenable about universalism is the fact, for us, in Isaiah chapter 10, the Lord said, though the number of the children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, yet a remnant shall be saved. Well, to me, and by the way, that passage is alluded to and used by Paul in Romans chapters 9 through 11 in his discussion of the salvation of Israel and the salvation of the remnant. And so here we have a passage that emphatically limits salvation to a remnant. Out of all the mass of Israel, though the number of children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, yet a remnant shall be saved. Not everyone, not all Israel. And those are some of the things that help me to, I think, at least, I would like to think, better understand Romans chapter 11, and so all Israel shall be saved. Paul, throughout Romans 9 through 11, he's been quoting from these Old Testament prophecies of the salvation of the remnant.
Right.
And, Isaiah 35, and I believe it's Isaiah 55, if I'm not mistaken, it would be the remnant that would return to Jerusalem with singing and with joy. And there's a book that was written, The Survivors in Israel. I've forgotten the author's name right now, but it's a really good-sized book. And over, that what he does is develop the concept of the remnant. So that's what I developed last week, while you were kind of under the weather, of demonstrating that this concept of the temple is tied to the salvation of the remnant in the last days. Well, there's another concept. Since Isaiah chapter 65 is dealing with the last days, the new creation, new heavens, new earth, et cetera, the Messianic temple, there's another concept there that is really, really critical, and that is the concept. In Isaiah 65, the Lord said, I will measure your guilt and the guilt of your fathers into your bosom. Well, Edward Young, in his commentary on Isaiah, said, what we have here is the concept of collective guilt and the filling up of the measure of sin. And other commentaries beside Young, Leupold, I believe, also does the same thing, of pointing out that what we're talking here, and remember, we are being taken by Isaiah to the last days. And we know that because Paul is using Isaiah and the promise of the remnant being saved and applying it to his generation. And so we have Paul in two areas, applying Isaiah chapter 65 to his generation. Isaiah 65, 1 and 2, he quotes in Romans 10, 20 and 21, and applies it to his ministry and applies it to Israel rejecting the gospel. Okay, so we have Paul applying Isaiah 65 to his generation in Romans 10. Then he discusses and he quotes from Isaiah chapter 10, verse 20. Though the number of children of Israel be as the sand of the sea, a remnant shall be saved. Paul likewise applies that to what was then ongoing in the first century generation. So we therefore have two major motifs from Isaiah 65 being applied by inspiration to the first century generation. That therefore raises, at least in my mind, an incredible question. Okay, since we have two passages from Isaiah 65 being applied to the first century generation, what would be the hermeneutic for just all of a sudden jumping when it wants to talk about, and when it does talk about the new creation, jumping forward to the end of time? One would have to question the narrative flow, the chronological flow, and be able to determine, well, okay, here's talking about the first century, now we're talking about the end of time.
Especially when you consider that Peter, in his application of some of these remnant passages in his two epistles, he applies that to his generation. In fact, he makes it plain that they didn't know what they're necessarily talking about at the time or the manner of the things that they spoke, but we do because it's been revealed by the Spirit. And pulling from Hosea and Isaiah, all flesh is grass, and at the end of 1 Peter 1, and then 1 Peter 2, He references Hosea's children, he who is without mercy, whatnot. And then he also brings in Isaiah 65 and 66 in 2 Peter 3, writing about things that he was reminding them of, about the first epistle. So even Peter, if you go past those few passages in Isaiah 65 quoted by Paul, even Peter pulls in the greater context of the remnant of Israel and the restoration of that remnant in with this theme of a new heavens and new earth. So you can't really, you might try to get away from it in Paul, but you can't really get away from it in Peter. Not to mention that Paul talks about the redemption of the creation in Romans chapter 8 before he cites those two passages, which were in the context of the redemption of creation in Isaiah 65 and 66. So
That's exactly right. Yeah.
I don't really see how you could, force that to work, for you, if you know what I mean. So.
Well, it has been amazing to me down through the years in all of my study of the new heaven and new earth, a subject that's been a fascination to me for years and years and years. And, obviously I've written on it. But when I read, for instance, the dispensational literature, dispensationalists have a tendency to go to Isaiah chapter 65, and they literally pick out a verse here and apply that to what they say, the millennium. And then they go down here to the new heaven and new earth. Oh, that's the end of the millennium. And they don't ever show you from the text. They don't even attempt to show you from the text, from the grammar, from the syntax, from anything, where the delineation is, where the break-in subject is. They just arbitrarily insert, thousands of years, literally.
Yeah.
At the end of a verse or at the beginning of a verse. And they do it simply because of their preconceived paradigm that they literally lay on top of the text and force the text to fit into the paradigm instead of creating their paradigm out of the text.
Yeah. And let's not let our Church of Christ brothers and sisters off the hook either. They would accuse premillennialists of doing the same thing. In fact, as you've pointed out in some of your old articles and things, that when speaking to dispensationalists, we press them on the kingdom is at hand and whatnot. But when talking to preterists, time is elastic, whatnot, So Isaiah 65 and 66, the same thing has happened. Oh, of course, Paul's talking about the extension of the gospel to the Gentiles in the first few verses. Of course, Paul has in mind the kingdom of God, as he did in Isaiah 2. Well, hold on now, though. This one here, day with the Lord is 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is one day. So our dispensationalist friends do that, but so do our amillennial and postmillennial friends as well,
Well, there's no question about it. And that struck me very, very early on in my own struggles with my eschatology.
Yeah.
I was at one time pretty good friends with Wayne Jackson, who's passed away now.
Yeah.
Wayne was a really, really good student in many ways. I appreciated a lot of his writings. When it came to dealing with atheists, he did some really fine work, some apologetic work. And when dealing with dispensationalists, he did some good work. He wrote a little tract years and years and years ago, Dispensationalism, a System of Infidelity. And in that book, he went to Matthew chapter 3, where John said, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is drawn near." And he said, there's simply no way, this is a rough paraphrase, there's simply no way to make any sense of what John said by making it apply for 2,000 years. That is a system of infidelity. And, when I read that as I was struggling, and yet I knew what what Wayne's comments were when it came to the parousia has drawn near in James chapter 5. I knew what his position was on most of the New Testament passages that contain time statements of imminence about the parousia. As you pointed out, one day is with the Lord 1,000 years. And one of his most famous statements that I used against him over and over and over and over in articles responding to him is that we have to understand that prophetic time is very elastic.
Yeah.
Well, the way that Wayne Jackson dealt with time statements in regard to the parousia, he turned those time statements into silly putty. I mean, that's all the world you can say. They meant nothing, and yet he would slip up very, very commonly and write an article against dispensationalists again, still in the midst of controverting with us.
Yeah.
And he would say, well, the dispensationalists just don't understand that when God communicated, he communicated truthfully.
Right.
And to say that he didn't says he either didn't want to communicate truthfully when he said something was going to happen and when it was going to happen, or he didn't want to communicate, or he purposely lied.
Well, you know how many sermons, articles, books, debates that I heard that defined at hand in this way, and I think it's valid. They go to Mark 1:15. The
Yep.
time is fulfilled, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Repent and believe the gospel. Then they'd go to Mark 9:1. There's some standing here who will not taste death till they see the kingdom come with power and glory. Okay, well, the kingdom is at hand, Mark 1:15. Before some of you die, therefore, at hand must mean before some of you die.
That's exactly right.
Within reach, And that was wonderful for me when I got to Revelation in my Bible reading. These things will take place at hand. Okay, before some of you die. All right, done.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens. So, we do have that tendency to sort of change the way we speak depending on who we're talking with. And consistency is what we ought to aim for. And
Well, and let's face it, none of us are perfectly consistent.
Sure.
We all of us are subject to self-contradiction. Just a week or so ago, I got into an exchange with a young man on Facebook. Someone had posted a picture of my brand new book, Temple to Telos, and it had some really, really super nice things to say about it. Well, this other young man posted and said, there is just so much in this book that is in error. And I was, okay. I expected him to elucidate, and
Sure.
explain what the error was, but he didn't. So I asked him, well, what is it that you disagree with? What's erroneous about it? Well, to make a long story short, as we corresponded, he said the end of the age came at the cross, citing Hebrews 9:26. Turned right around in another post within 2 or 3 hours of it, saying the end of the age came in AD 70. Then he said the law was nailed to the cross. Pardon me. Turned right around and said the law ended at AD 70. And I'm kind of following along here, trying to make sense of someone who's so grossly self-contradictory.
Sure.
And finally, it just came down because he essentially just let me know how ignorant I am. That I just simply don't understand when I'm pointing out that here's a text that seems to contradict him. I just simply don't understand because I'm not observing the context and what have you. Well, okay, show me the context. Show me where it's wrong. No, you don't understand. You're not grasping the reality of what's going on here. So finally, I just posted, I said, I'm having a difficult time following it. I said, you're contradicting yourself in more ways than I can really chronicle. And I said, here are a few ways. End of the age at the cross, end of the age in AD 70. End of the law at the cross, end of the law at AD 70. So I said, I would really like for you to explain these different positions from Scripture, how you can affirm this. I said, now, when you say the end of the age came at the cross, I'm going to have to go to Matthew chapter 13, where Jesus said the end of the age is the coming of the Son of Man with the angels, the time of the harvest / resurrection. So I said, I'm not with you on that. He deleted the entire discussion and then posted, I am so put off by how dishonorable Don Preston is. And I was like, what's dishonorable about pointing out how a fellow contradicted himself?
Yeah.
And so I say that, I took it for granted the young man was honest, but then it turns out, obviously, he wasn't as honest as I was hoping. but all of us are subject to error. I mean, let's just face it. Nobody, me included for sure, is infallible or is inspired. I mean, I've got things in some of my earlier books. I said things in my very first book on 2 Peter 3. I had to go back and correct in my second version of that. And I pointed out in the revised version, here's what I said in the very first version. Here's where I'm at now. What I said was wrong. I don't have a problem with being wrong at all. I'm reminded of what my friend John Anderson said. John had this radio program some years ago. Unfortunately, John passed away. But John made a statement to me on one occasion, and it was one of those statements that the very first time you hear it, you go, what? And I said, would you say that again? I said, I'm not sure I heard you. He said, unless we're willing to be wrong, we will never be right.
Hmm.
And the second or third or fourth time he said it, I'm going, okay, gotcha. Now I understand, unless we are willing to have the mental integrity and mental honesty to look at what we believe in a fresh light, in light of fresh evidence, in light of more evidence, and unless we're willing to say, you know what, here's what I believe, but it's clearly not wrong or clearly not correct now, so I'm going to have to change my mind. I'll tell you this, I've done that within this brand new year with positions that I've held in the past.
Yeah.
And, to me, that's, and we've talked about that a lot on this program. That's part of the joy of learning.
Yeah, of course.
And, the more we learn, theoretically at least, the more we learn, the more we know the mind of God, the more we know the heart of God. And the more we know the heart and the mind of God, the more his words open up to us.
Yeah.
Not in some quasi miraculous, inspired way, but just better understanding his will. And obviously, the more we study history, the more we study grammar, the more we study the languages and linguistics, the more we study the entire context of the Bible, then the more information that we have that allows us to assimilate and for our subconscious, as it were, to start using all of this information and going, hey, guess what? This is not true over here anymore. What we thought was true is not true. Here's a position that's closer to the truth. So that to me is just an ongoing and exciting process.
It is exciting. And what wouldn't be exciting if there was an end to it. If there was an end to it, you would just one day be done and there you know it all, And I used to think that there was an end to it in my youth, but also in the way that I was trained to think about the Bible. I thought that there was an end to it. But now, as Paul kind of stepped back and said, it's immeasurable, the depth and the richness. I mean, it's wonderful. Every time you go to Scripture, you learn something new, it seems. And so, to me, that's just a joy. It doesn't discourage me and go, well, I can't know it all. Why even try? No, it's like, bring on the challenge. Let's have some fun,
I had someone contact me just recently. I certainly won't mention their name, but they were actually discouraged by how much there is to know and to learn.
Yeah.
And they said, I can never know it all. And I said, dude, join the club.
Yeah.
I said, you're not going to know it all. We cannot know everything there is to know about the Bible. There's always something else. We grab hold with what we think is a surety, and we hold on to it to the very best that we can. And as I've said many, many times, what I believe that I know, I'm willing to defend until someone shows me it's not the truth. Then I'll defend what I know that is new, that is better, that has more substance, more evidence to support it. And so that's what we're trying to do on this program, ladies and gentlemen. We're trying to bring you as much information as we can with the limited knowledge that is ours. Okay. All right. Now, I've got a whole lot of years ahead of Daniel in studying
A whole
a whole
lot.
bunch.
Whole
Yeah.
bunch.
Okay. Yeah. Let's not do that comparison too much. uh, yeah, it's one of those type of things that, boy, well, just today, not too much of a digression here. I was in a donut shop. I was not getting a donut. I was getting a croissant. They make fantastic
Oh, I
croissants.
thought you were going to say coffee.
No. So anyway, and there were a couple of policemen in there. Well, I had a situation at a piece of property that I own here in town of some policemen chasing some people. They ran onto my property and they didn't follow them because they didn't know whose property it was, et cetera. And it wasn't evidently a huge deal. But anyway, I was concerned that maybe it was a drug guy. Maybe they stashed some drugs on my property. So there were a couple of policemen in this donut shop. And so I walked over and I said, "Oh, I'd like to ask a question." So I explained the situation. So I said, "Should I get one of you fellas, get a policeman to come down there, go through my property, and just make sure there's no drugs being stashed there?" I said, I don't want anything to do with that. And they said, "Well, to be honest about it, not that we're not concerned with drugs, but we'd be more concerned with somebody stashing a gun." And I was like, "Well, yeah, hadn't even thought about that, but that's an obvious concern." So anyway, I got a card and he says, "So your name is Don Preston?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Well," he said, "Do you fish?" And I said, "I only wish I could. I don't have time for it." And he goes, "Well, I've got a friend that's got a friend. His name is Preston, but he's a good bit older than you." And I said, "Good grief, how old is he?" I said, "I'm 73." And he literally goes, "What?" He said, "You're not 73." And I said, "Yeah, I am." And he goes, "Dude, you look really good for 73." I go, all right, all
Yeah.
right.
Did you buy his donut for him?
I should have bought them both a donut and a cup of coffee. Yeah. So anyway, just a little bit of a digression there.
I think you were saying something about how even though you're older than me, that they shouldn't think I'm a dummy because, I'm still super smart and wise above my years. I thought that's what you were going to say. That's what the cue card.
I don't remember that being what I was going to say.
It was
That
on the
doesn't
cue card I was holding up for you. You didn't
Oh,
see?
I'm sorry. I didn't read it. I'm not good at teleprompters.
Oh well.
Yeah. Okay. Now, well, we're already halfway through here. So we've looked at the remnant again, kind of brought us up to speed, and how that brings us to the first century salvation of the remnant. That means that this whole doctrine of the Messianic temple should be placed in the first century. Well, let's look at another concept that I've already mentioned ever so briefly. Your sins and the sins of your fathers will a measure into your bosom. Again, as commentators take note, what is going on here is the concept of the filling up of the measure of sin. Now, let's be sure to know at different times in Israel's history, the 10 northern tribes filled up the measure of their sin, carried off into Assyrian captivity. Judah and Benjamin filled up the measure of their sin, carried off into Babylonian captivity. Even during what we call the intertestamental period. In Daniel chapter 8, 23 and following, the Lord speaks of the sinners in Israel coming to a fullness. This is obviously during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. So, yeah, that intertestamental period of time was another period of time in which Israel filled up the measure of their sin. That's why I am convinced the Lord allowed Antiochus Epiphanes to come in judgment of Jerusalem. He didn't destroy the city. He didn't destroy the sanctuary at all. He didn't lead off thousands upon thousands of captives off into captivity. He didn't do any of those, but he most assuredly did bring damage to the city, the sanctuary, and the people. But when we come to the New Testament, this theme and this motif, this doctrine of the filling up of the measure of sin takes on an added, magnified importance. And I don't know of a text that more powerfully brings that to light than Matthew chapter 23. Now, mind you, even though it's not specifically stated in these terms, there are other passages before Matthew 23 that talk about or discuss the filling up the measure of sin. We find the parable of the wicked husbandman. A great man owned a vineyard. He let it out to husbandmen. When the time for the vintage harvest came, he sent out his servants to gather the harvest. The servants of, the vineyard workers beat them. He sent some more. They beat them. Finally, he said, well, I will send my son. Surely they will reverence him. But when the son came, they said among themselves, here is the son. Let us kill him and take the inheritance for ourselves. But when they killed the son, the master of the vineyard, and I tell you, I cannot help but laugh every time I read and discuss Matthew 21 of how Jesus just so artfully, beautifully entrapped those self-righteous, arrogant Pharisees, Sadducees, and those lawyers, these brilliant lawyers, all of these leading theologians of the day. So Jesus turns to these guys and he says, when the master of the vineyard, and I really think this is powerful, when the master of the vineyard comes, and he uses the Greek word elthi, which is a cognate of erkomai. This is a word that is used, a verbal form that is used for parousia. You have the erkomai, elthi, the verb resulting in the parousia. So Jesus poses the question, what will the master of that vineyard do when he comes? And those brilliant theologians, not even seeing the train coming, said he will utterly destroy those wicked men and give out his vineyard to another. Yep.
Little David and Nathan there, and they didn't even realize it.
Oh, thou art the man.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But here's the point, ladies and gentlemen. Do you see what Jesus was leading up to? Do you see what Jesus was presenting? He was presenting the idea of filling up the measure of sin. The master of the vineyard didn't come when they mistreated the first servants. He didn't come when they mistreated the second group of servants. But the last straw in this parable was the killing of the son.
Yeah.
Matthew 22 is another parable that presents the motif of filling the measure. A certain nobleman made a great wedding feast for his son, sent out his servants to call those who had already been invited. That's the force of the Greek. They were already invited. They knew it was coming. They knew it was going to be a great thing. So he sent out his servants to call the servants, those who had already been invited. And with one accord, they began to make excuse saying, well, I've married a wife. I can't come. And don't you know the wife would have loved to have been at this fancy, prestigious wedding feast, for crying out loud? You turned down the invitation? It's an opportunity for me to wear my finest dress and get all dolled up, and you didn't. Not smart. Not smart at all.
I will say, though, that having kids is awesome on New Year's Eve, because you say, sorry, we have to go home. It's 9 o'clock. We got to go home for the bedtime. It's awesome. You don't have to stay up till 12. You can go home and sit on the couch and,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. The point being that here they mistreated the servants.
Yeah.
They don't kill the son, but the master of the vineyard was angry at those men, sent out his armies, killed those wicked servants, or killed those wicked men, and burnt their city. And I like what Donald Hagner says in the Word Biblical Commentary set on Matthew. He says, it is impossible for a modern reader to read this and not think about AD 70. Well, I think he's exactly right. But what do we find? Filling up the measure of sin.
Yeah.
It wasn't enough just to refuse the invitation, but to start persecuting the servants. That was the final straw. And then we come to Matthew chapter 23. I have to tell you, Daniel, even in the preterist movement, and I've been saying this for years, I am not absolutely sure that the concept of the avenging of the blood of the martyrs, which is obviously a corollary with filling up the measure of sin through persecuting the saints, I'm not 100% positive that that theme is fully grasped by even a lot of preterists. Now, I do know that some really, really fine Bible students such as Sam Dawson's book, huge book. I mean, from Genesis to Maps, he develops the theme of the avenging of the blood of the martyrs. One of the best books out there.
It's the commentary on Revelation, right?
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, even what's his name? The non-institutional guy, Art Ogden.
Art Ogden, the avenging of the blood of the apostles and prophets.
Yeah, that's a free one. You can get online in a PDF, I believe. At least
I didn't realize it was available now.
It used to be on aogden.net or something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
If you search his name, you can find it. I got it for free on well, maybe it wasn't the whole book. Maybe it was just the introduction. But the introduction is where he talks about all that anyway. So,
Yeah, I bought his book right after it came out, and he did a masterful job. He got lost on the millennium, obviously, but
Sure.
still, the book overall is still. I mean, in one way, I don't know how you lose the thread of martyr vindication in the millennium when you have the martyrs at the beginning of the millennium. What are they doing? They're waiting. Yeah. They're sitting on thrones waiting. What are they waiting for? Vindication.
His audio on the dating of Revelation at the Florida College lecture. Have you heard that? Where he says his position and everybody laughs. It's funny.
No, I have not heard his presentation.
I'll send you his website and an email so you can look through some of that.
And you say they laughed at him?
It was all in good fun. He was. He said, "I'm outnumbered here,ur something like that."
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah. I got you.
I'll send it to you.
Well, I'll tell you a story about Arthur Ogden. He was speaking in Ohio some years ago. It's when Jack Scott was still at Warren as the minister, up there with Terry Seibert, what have you. So Jack Scott and Terry Seibert traveled to this gospel meeting where Art Ogden was going to speak. And he spoke on Revelation. He spoke on this, the theme, martyr vindication. And he said in his presentation, said in the sermon, all of God's promises to Old Covenant Israel have been fulfilled. There's nothing left to be fulfilled. Well, they had a Q&A session. And Jack, real quiet, humble Jack, he's kind of like me.
Yeah.
Just, doesn't like to talk. Got to the mic, complimented his brother Ogden's lesson, and he said, I would like a point of clarification. Did I hear you correctly saying all of God's Old Covenant promises made to Old Covenant Israel have been fulfilled? Nothing is left to be fulfilled to Old Covenant Israel. And he said, that's absolutely correct. He said, that is my position. And Jack said, well, Brother Ogden, with all due respect, are you not aware that the Old Covenant predicted the second coming, the judgment, the resurrection of the dead? promises made to Old Covenant Israel. And Jack was telling me about it over the phone. He said, Brother Ogden just simply stood there and stared at him
Man.
for the longest time. And finally he said, well, brother, it is more than obvious. I've got to go home and do some studying.
Wow.
What more can you ask for?
Yeah.
I mean, that was fantastic. So, uh, anyway, that's a fascinating subject. So this whole subject, but in spite of the fact that we have men like Sam Dawson, who's, like I said, folks, if you want a really thorough treatment of the subject of the martyr vindication, of filling up the measure of sin through martyrdom or through killing the saints and the promise of vindication, etc., you need to get a copy of Sam Dawson's book. Now, I sell it through our website. So if you want to buy a copy of it, contact me and I'll be glad to help you out and pay the shipping on it, no less.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So it's a really fantastic book. It honestly is. So here in Isaiah.
Oh, I want to throw out that
Yeah.
they should also listen to your hour-long lecture. What's that college that you spoke? It was a foreview of Revelation,
Oh,
foreview of
yes.
the Millennium.
Yeah. Criswell College
There you go. Yeah.
down in Dallas. I was invited down there. I was on the dais with Ken Gentry.
Yep.
Oh my goodness gracious! I just went.
Was it
I
Thomas
just
Ice or who was it?
No. Thomas was not on the dais.
Okay.
Uh, Blomberg, Greg Blomberg was on the
Oh,
dais.
wow.
They had three other leading spokesmen for the respective
Yeah,
positions
that's great.
on there, and I was the preterist presenting the fulfilled view of the millennium, and
But it was all based around this very theme of modern
exactly right.
martyr vindication. Yeah.
My view of the millennium is based upon the concept of martyr vindication.
Somebody
Uh,
says, was it Hitchcock that was on there with you?
no, Mark Hitchcock was not there.
Oh, okay. I got you.
I apologize. My goodness gracious. I didn't think I would forget the name of those other fellows. Anyway, there they, um, well, again, I apologize. Just went just totally blank on it. If anyone wants the names of them, I can certainly get that for you. Uh, the my presentation was carried in the journal of Criswell College. I do not know if it's online. I do know that Criswell College took tremendous heat for having me on that lectureship. I mean, did they ever catch the flack for having me on. But
I'm gonna, well, was it, well, these are the articles that were in there. Wayne House, GK Bill, Craig
Wayne House was one of them. That's exactly right.
Craig A. Blazing,
Yes, Craig Blazing.
and then Craig Blomberg, and then Kenneth Gentry, and then
Yeah,
yourself. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, and Dr. Brian Kidwell.
No, he was not on the
Oh,
dais.
okay. They just wrote articles for that same.
Right. He just wrote the article in the journal.
There you
Yeah.
go.
What was funny is that I issued a challenge to the other men as we were up on the platform, as we were up on the stage. I issued a challenge to debate my position. And I just looked right down the row at him. I said, I'd like to know if any one of you men will accept my challenge to meet me in formal public debate to discuss this issue. They just sit there just like,
Oh boy.
they wouldn't even respond. I mean, literally would not respond. So anyway, but I will tell you this as a little anecdote as we move along. It was either two or three young men approached me after my presentation during a break. And they came up and they told me, they said, we're students here. And they said, we want you to know that was the most powerful, the most convincing presentation we have ever heard in our life
Wow.
on the millennium and on this subject. They said, that is absolutely, totally convincing. And I go, thank you very much. I don't know whatever became of them. I've not heard from them, at least that I know of. But that was really refreshing. That was very, very exciting.
Yeah. You used to have the Criswell College on your on your website, but I can't find it now, so I'm not sure.
Well, I have that presentation available.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's on my website. I probably need to make that available for a download for people so that they can listen to it. Um,
Well,
and like I said, yeah, you might.
I'll stop distracting you.
Oh, okay, that's fine. Okay, so anyway, the third passage just in Matthew. I mean, this theme, ladies and gentlemen, this theme is everywhere in the Gospels. As a matter of fact, a couple of years ago, I actually started writing a book, imagine that, on the doctrine of blood atonement and the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John has a lot of themes, that are interwoven into it. I mean, obviously, the feast days is the dominant one. I mean, it's just in chapter after chapter after chapter. Pardon me. But the doctrine of blood atonement is also very, very much present if we understand what the doctrine of blood atonement was. And very simply stated was, if somebody inadvertently, accidentally, or in a fit of passion, fit of rage, as it were, kills someone else, they could flee to a city of refuge. There were 6 cities of refuge, 3 on the east side of Jordan, 3 on the west side of Jordan. Okay. And they could flee there. However, if they committed premeditated murder, there was no city of refuge for them. And what was called the avenger of blood. Now, there's some controversy about exactly who is the avenger of blood, whether he was appointed by elders of a given city, or whether the family could hire an avenger of blood, or whether a member of the family could act as the avenger of blood. So there's controversy about it, but there's no question about the fact that God provided for, in the case of premeditated murder, wherever that murderer went, he could be chased down and killed, even if he made it to a city of refuge. The avenger of blood could go into that city, drag him out, and kill him to avenge the blood. And over and over and over and over again, what do we find in the book of John? The Jews willingly, knowingly rejecting Jesus and plotting his murder. And I am convinced that any good Jewish reader of the Gospel of John would know without a doubt, as the plot proceeded through the Gospel of John, as the animosity toward Jesus built, as the knowledge of Jesus built, and in spite of that knowledge, the rebellion against him built, and the plot to kill him developed, any good Jewish mind is going to go, oh, you don't want to do that. You really, really, really don't want to do that, because if you do, judgment will become, and it will come on the leaders of the nation. Therefore, it will come on the nation, because the leaders of the nation are the representatives of the nation. They guided the nation. Pardon me. So, like I said, I am personally convinced that the doctrine of blood atonement plays a very powerful, although a backstory, perhaps, perhaps as an underlying story of the many themes that are developed so marvelously in the Gospel of John. I believe it's there, and I think it's very, very powerful.
Yeah.
So in Matthew chapter 23, as we close out this evening, what do we find? Jesus is standing in the temple, and he pronounces Some say 6, some say 7 woes. But he says, woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, for you build the tombs and you adorn the tombs of the prophets. And you say, had we been alive in the days of our fathers, we would not have slain the prophets. And thereby you bear witness to yourselves that you are the sons of those who killed the prophets. And he said, how can you escape the condemnation of Gehenna? And boy, you think that's not powerful?
Yeah.
I mean, we tend to think of Gehenna as eternal hellfire.
Sure.
The first century Jew standing in Jerusalem knew exactly what Gehenna was. It was outside the gates on the south side of the city. It was full of dead, decaying, rotten corpses. It's where they dumped all of their refuse. It's where they dumped criminals. It's where they dumped murderers.
I've got a question about that, by the way, after we get off the podcast.
Okay.
I guess I can ask it to you now.
Okay.
I was looking up that. I've been doing some studies on hell, and I was trying to find a historical source for that. And I mean, I looked everywhere, and I couldn't find anything past like a 15th century rabbi that said that. I couldn't find Josephus anything about it. So if you have any resources on that, send them to me because I've been on the hunt. So.
Well, actually, some of the ancient Jews did believe in that type of concept. For instance, in the book of 4th Ezra,
okay,
there are statements about the wicked burning in an eternal hell.
Oh, I just meant about the garbage dump aspect of it.
Okay.
Because I couldn't find anything about the garbage dump. The eternal hell thing, yeah, I've read Edward Fudge or whatever on that, but yeah, I'm not worried about that part. I meant the garbage dump because I couldn't find anything on the garbage dump past like 15th century or so.
Well, of course, this is a recent scholar, but Marius Reeser points in his book, Jesus and Judgment, points out that when Jesus threatened the Jews of Jerusalem and Judea with hellfire or being cast out, Matthew chapter 8, when the sons of the kingdom shall be cast out, that would have signified to them the being cast into the dump.
Sure.
There are some, let me see, who was that? There's some commentators who make that application in Isaiah chapter 66, where their worm dies not.
Yeah, I'll get in more details with you after. I should have waited till afterwards to bring that up. But anyways, so back to this: who can escape the judgment of Gehenna? So they knew what that was talking about. In other words,
they absolutely knew what that was, and to go back to that allusion that I just made. And Marius Reeser, pardon me, in his book Jesus and Judgment, when Jesus said to the Jews that they would be cast out, he said that was a direct reference to being, coming destruction and being cast out into the dump, where all the dead bodies of all the criminals and the poor and dead animals and everything, and it literally did smoke day and night, unbroken. And so it was a horrific threat. And we're out of time, so we'll have to pick this up next week. But this is so important, ladies and gentlemen, because this concept of the filling up of the measure of sin, meant that judgment was coming on the corporate body, but salvation would be for the remnant, and it would be in Zion. So we'll pick this up next week. In the meantime, thanks for joining us here on Two Guys and a Bible on Fulfilled Radio, a voice you can trust. Daniel, good night. Ladies and gentlemen, good night and God bless.